I'd like to start with an observation on behavior, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the behavior of shareholders, and not only shareholders, but also the behavior of the other elements of the ecosystem. And well, I support very much the objectives that you've set, Jeroen. I support, I think, the directive that includes quite a number of very good elements. Not everything is there, I think, we've heard already today. But let's be honest with ourselves. I don't think a piece of legislation is changing behavior. I think what we've seen, if we look back, how behavior has changed, well, I think it has changed because of organizations such as Better Finance. It has changed with people like Graham. It has changed with people like Warren Buffett and Larry Fink. And I think Larry Fink wrote a letter to the CEOs of large companies recently that actually makes the right point and has been a key incentive to change, a key driver of change. And what does he say in this letter? And it's going to bring me to my first point, which is about the importance, the critical importance of information, the lifeblood of capital markets. What is Larry Fink saying? Well, it's saying that he wants, as an investor, more strategic information, more long-term information, more information on ESG in Brussels jargon, so environmental, social, and governance factors. That's what he's calling for. And he's even calling for companies to provide that in an integrated manner. So he's making actually a big case in his letter for integrated reporting. Probably the next development, or the most promising, I think, development in the space of reporting. So information, I think, is really critical. And as I've said, representing the Federation of European Accountants, information is not only numbers, it's also narrative information. There is a lot more than numbers. And I think what the role of a profession is today on that is to make this information work for all the elements, all the people of this ecosystem. So on that, actually, the Federation has produced a report on the future of reporting, because we believe that reporting has to change. And we're starting a conversation with all the other parts of the ecosystem on what this change should actually look like. And one of the key elements I think we have identified in the course of this work and the conversations we've had is that the audience of reporting is really growing. And the content of reporting is equally growing. So we need to make this match. And the other element that maybe we haven't sufficiently talked about today is technology, because this is radically changing the equation, not only on how we communicate, and very often, in Brussels and in circles where you have lawyers and accountants and policymakers, we're all getting terribly excited about sending, PDF files by email. But there's a lot more to technology than that, and this lot more that is actually really changing the equation of transparency and reporting, communication with investors. One of the conclusions we reach in this report is that, yes, there is a need for a change, there is a need for evolution, but this evolution will not happen if reporting, especially financial reporting, is in a straitjacket. So there is a need to create space for evolution, and that's a very difficult thing. It's an easy thing to say. It's a far more difficult thing to realize, but I think we all have to think about that. What is the impact of regulation on innovation being much needed in the space of reporting? So again, coming back to the Graham, Guillaume, and Larry Fink of this world, I think you guys have a tremendous role in encouraging change. And legislation, I believe, very often follows, actually, the change. Now, it's all good, and that brings me to my second point. It's all fantastic to have information, but this information needs to be credible. It needs to be reliable. And that's not a new issue. That's an issue that capital markets have had since the creation of companies, actually, of share companies. And the solution that markets have found to this information asymmetry and this need for credibility and reliability is the audit, which was an invention of markets before being a regulatory requirement. And I would say the comments I made on information and the need for corporate reporting to evolve are probably equally valid for auditing. And we see this happening. And that brings me to a second report that we produced on the future of the audit and the future of assurance services. So we're very much looking at the future right now in the Federation, maybe also because the present is not so exciting these days. But I think it is important that we look at how this credibility, this reliability can be brought to shareholders, but also growingly to stakeholders at large. And what's happening is that, well, with this growing demand for information, there is a need, I think, to have a in-depth reflection on how especially ESG information can be assured. What can we do with long-term information? What should we do on narrative reporting? I think there are plenty and integrated reporting. There are plenty of questions that we should now really address and that investors and regulators should encourage, not block, not inhibit. I think that's really important. And we're coming back also to technology. I mean, with big data, with data analytics, what we see is that the whole ecosystem of the audit, to continue using this analogy, is and can change if it is not blocked. And maybe things like, basing the audit on a sample of transaction, on a sample of information, is something that with the potential of big data and data analytics will be something of the past. So there are really plenty of opportunities that we should look at. And one of the things that recently we've been also, working very hard on, and that I think is a very welcome development, is the enhancement of the audit report. Because one thing is to do the audit, another thing I think is to have the auditor speak to my colleagues here on my right to inform them of what the audit, has delivered in terms of value. Where is this going to be done? Well, I think, Julie made the point also that it is very difficult to engage with investors, with shareholders. Yes, indeed. And it's equally difficult for the auditor than for other people. And one of the things I think that we should, keep in mind when we think about this difficulty, I think, is that, investors today are far more diverse than they used to be. And I love the slide that we always see on how big investors are taking over small investors, let's say. But big investors are a very, very diverse crowd, and a diversifying crowd, I think. You see, the big pension funds. You see activist hedge funds that are developing. You see responsible investment that is growing. And these are really, I think, drivers of change. But it's still a very fragmented community, and for everybody, I think, not only for the auditor, it's a constituency that is very difficult to engage with. And that's going to be my last point, Julie, don't worry. I personally think it is important that the board, as a board, remains in its role, and to my view, the main elements of this role is actually to provide, to focus on the strategy, to provide, advice to the managers, and to play its role of, oversight. But it shouldn't become a watchdog and an additional layer of regulatory constraint, in a sense, or a proxy to implement regulation. So the board is different from the shareholders, I believe. And what I think is important and what is really going to play a critical role moving forward, and I think that's one of the welcomed developments in the audit reform, because all were not welcomed, I think it's the audit committee and the role that the audit committee can play as a kind of hub, as a platform to actually review very carefully the information that is provided, the role that the auditors plays on this information, and the needs of investors. So I'd really like to maybe stop here, because I think the role of the audit committee is at the center of making this whole equation work and the ecosystem thrive. Thank you.